Welcome, everyone. This is Joe Dager, the host of the Business 901 podcast. With me today is Tiny Ulwick. Tony is the pioneer of the jobs to be done theory, the inventor of the outcome-driven innovation process, and the founder of the strategy innovation consulting firm Strategy. His latest book, Jobs to be Done, solidifies this framework and picks up where his first book might have left off, which was What Customers Want. So, Tony, thanks for joining me. And I'm not sure everyone knows you've been what I might call a process person your whole life. Did you start out in the quality field, or where did that process bug take root?
Well, thanks, Joe. Well, you've heard the terms QFD, right? You're familiar with QFD?
Sure.
Yeah, I've filled out lots of matrices in my days back in my early IBM days. I actually started as a process engineer working for IBM back in the 1980s. And I worked on their PC line. I created a few printer products first, then moved over to the PC line. And so my background's actually in process engineering, and in manufacturing. So back in those days, statistical process control was getting big. Six Sigma was just starting. So my background in all of this really comes from that perspective.
Well, in your earlier work, in your first book, What the Customer Wants, the subtitle contains outcome-driven innovation.
Right.
And how did the ODI segue into jobs to be done, or is it something completely different?
No, it's actually the same thing. So I can tell the story, but we started thinking about outcome-driven innovation back in the late 80s, early 90s. It really occurred to me back in around 1990 timeframe how all this could work. And I'll even go back a little farther than that. I worked on a product called the PC Junior at IBM, and it was a horrible failure. In fact, the day after it was introduced in the Wall Street Journal, the headlines read, "PC Junior is a flop." And I thought, well, that's bad news. But what it really got me thinking about was, how did they figure that out? In other words, there's some metrics they were using to decide that product was a failure. And I thought, gosh, if we only knew what those metrics were well in advance, we could just design the product around those metrics and have a winning product. So that got me down this path thinking, what are those metrics? And then years later, it occurred to me that if we focused on the underlying process that people were executing instead of the product or the customer, then we could actually break it down like we break down a manufacturing process, right? We could look at that and break it down step by step and then apply metrics to it. In the manufacturing world, the way we say it is, we need to figure out what do we need to measure and control to produce a predictable output, right? And what we're saying here is, what do we need to measure and control to ensure we can help customers achieve that underlying process to a greater degree? So that was the thinking, and then that was the birth of outcome-driven innovation. I started Strategy in 1991. We had lots of really great successes early on and continued through the 90s. And in 1999, I introduced the concept to Clay Christensen. I read his book, The Innovator's Solution, when it came out. The Innovator's Dilemma, loved it, and thought that outcome-driven innovation was really a possible solution to the innovator's dilemma. So I called him up and told him that I thought that, and he was kind enough to offer me an invite to come see him. So went and visited Clay in his office in Harvard and introduced him to outcome-driven innovation. And we met a few times over the subsequent years, but he really liked the idea that we focused on the underlying process and not the product or the customer. And in years after that, before he wrote The Innovator's Solution, I met with him again. He talked about the idea that the underlying process really wasn't that sexy. It doesn't flow very nicely. So the underlying job sounds a lot better. And the concept of the job to be done was born. And Clay put that in his book, in The Innovator's Solution. He cited our work and contributions from that point. And that chapter really became a very often cited part of that book. And Jobs to be Done, that was back in 2003. And it slowly took off and then has gained a lot of momentum in the last 10 years or so.
Certainly has, and it's on. It seems it's really gained momentum in the last, I would say, 4 or 5 years. Would you agree with that?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I think as people are trying it and seeing that it's successful, it's just gaining more and more momentum. So this is great. Like I said, we've been at this for 25 years now. We just celebrated our 25-year anniversary last month.
I saw that. I saw that. Well, tell me, is it because maybe one of the reasons it's starting to get more popular is it because people are more acceptable to process and process thinking in design, that we're starting to get, say, oh, we brought the OODA loop in, we brought the lean startup, IDEO's design thinking, but that underlying process of gathering that information to a client is the key, and that your process seems to do it. Are we just, maybe are we more receptive to processes? Is that maybe a decent hypothesis?
Oh gosh, that's a great question. It's I don't think people really love process, especially when it comes to innovation. They often say that I've read lots of articles that say process kills innovation. And of course, I don't necessarily agree with that. I think there has to be a process for innovation so you can execute it in a way that mitigates risk, and that's what we've been all about for all this time. But I think that people are tired of failing. I think that's probably more of the motivation. When you see these, 5% success rates or 95% failure rates for all these years, I think people are just getting tired of it. And I think the movement is also taking hold in the startup space, where I don't think people have the patience anymore for failing. Pivoting and failing fast sound exciting, but learning fast and getting it right the first time is even more appealing. And I think there's a larger number of people who think that and are heading down that path and finding ways to adopt the Jobs thinking theory and bringing it to life.
Well, Andy, let me just mention the thing about startups, because startups always have this brilliant idea, right? Okay, this is what's going to work. And you say the idea first is a failed approach, but how do you do that? I mean, you still got to have the idea first, right? I mean, but then investigate, and more, let's say the lower scale, like a startup?
Well, you can have people have ideas all the time, right? I think the question is it a good idea, right? So how do you judge a good idea, right? And the way I think about it is, if the idea is good, it's going to help people either get a job done better and or more cheaply. And that would make it a good idea. So then you have to figure out, well, what does better mean? Better against what? Better compared to what? And this is where ODI comes into play. What are the metrics people use to measure better? And better to me means getting the job done better. So in order to figure out if you're getting the job done better, you need to know what those metrics are, and you can then evaluate your idea against that set of metrics to see how well it's getting the job done. What we typically find is that most ideas don't get a job done that much better, but they hold the potential to get the job done a lot better. In other words, if you knew what the entire job was, you can keep modifying your idea, because an idea is often a platform, for a solution. And if you know the entire job, you can start building on it and saying, okay, how do we build in different subsystems to get the entire job done? And now you can conceptualize a winning product in a marketplace. So I think having the model is really effective in terms of explaining how to shape an idea into something that's going to win in the marketplace.
Can you just, maybe for someone that's not familiar with the framework, just kind of do the elevator speech on the framework to put some context to it?
Sure. Well, I think the basic concept's simple. People buy products to get a job done. And winning products, or products win, I should say, if they help people get a job done better and or more cheaply. So now we have to figure out what better and or more cheaply means. I think more cheaply is a little bit easier to understand, but better is complicated. Better along what dimensions? And this is where the whole process comes into play, where, like I said before, if we can break down what that job is and understand the metrics people are using to measure value, then we can figure out how they measure value, and we can figure out if our idea gets the job done better. So it's really just bringing methodology to the process so that we can evaluate our idea. And what we've learned over time is that if an idea gets a job done 20 to 30% better or more, people will switch. That's people won't switch if your idea is just going to get the job done 1% better or 2% better. So there's some threshold there. And once we know what that entire job is, we know what metrics people are using, we begin to stack the odds in our favor. The premise is really simple, Joe. I mean, what we're trying to do here is to define the target with a level of precision that allows people to hit it. That's pretty much it. And if we know the target, the chances of hitting it are a lot greater.
Well, one of the things you mentioned there is that functional value and that price thing. And, there's a lot of talk about, the social component of value and the emotional component of value. Is your framework include that, or is functional the main component?
Our model includes all that. In What Customers Want, the book that we put out in 2005, it lays out all the different components, and we talk about it again in our latest book. But there's really 5 different components that we consider: the core functional job, the related jobs, the emotional jobs and social jobs, the consumption chain jobs, which are associated with buying, receiving, setting up, storing, disposing of the product, and then the financial metrics that the buyer uses to measure success and value in getting the job done better and or cheaper. So those are the key components. So they're all included. So which one's more important? Well, what we've learned over the years is that if you're going to create a product that's going to win in the marketplace, focusing on the core functional job first is the key thing. And what I mean by first, I mean when you're defining your market, define it around the core functional job, not the emotional job. So you got to start somewhere, right? So we're saying the center of the universe for creating value is that core functional job. And once you've defined it, then you can define your emotional jobs and related jobs and consumption chain jobs around that core functional job. That's really the key. And a lot of people get tripped up with this and they start focusing on some other element first. But think about it, that you're just trying to, everything is revolving around that core functional job. So getting it right is really the key to success.
Well, to me, it sounds like, when I go to a customer, there's maybe a lot of jobs that need to be done in this whole process, okay? Or thinking about it. I mean, if the first person I go into, maybe I'm talking to someone that's worried about the functional side. The other thing is how it plays on to different components within because it affects other people in the company. So when I look at this job to be done, how tight is that, or is there a lot of jobs that need to be done when I investigate here?
Well, so there's 2 parts of this, Joe. One is market selection, and then one is actually focusing on a particular market. And I see a bit of confusion in this as well. There are lots of jobs that customers are trying to get done. Absolutely. The first step is to pick one. Pick the one that you want to focus on. We call that market selection. You're trying to pick a group of people and a job that they're trying to get done. So it could be parents who are trying to pass on life lessons to children. It could be an anesthesiologist who's trying to monitor the patient's vital signs. There's obviously tens of thousands of jobs. You're trying to pick one where there's lots of job executors. They get the job done frequently. They're underserved. They're willing to pay more. But that's all market selection details, right? So you're trying to pick the group of people in the job that you want to focus on. Okay, first step. Now, once you've concluded that, then you move on to say, okay, now that I know what job I'm focused on, let's dig into detail. Like if my job is to focus on parents that are trying to pass on life lessons to children, and I choose that that's my market, now I go study that functional job, passing life lessons on to children. And I break it down into its component parts and understand how parents measure success and value as they're trying to perform that job. Is there an emotional component to it? Absolutely. They also want to be perceived as good parents. They want to feel like they're contributing to the growth of society. There's a lot of emotional jobs attached to that, but the core functional job is they're trying to pass on life lessons to children. There's related jobs too. They want to make them a better adult. They want to help them learn. They want to teach them to learn. Those are related to that core job as well. So you could focus on some of those related jobs in addition. There's consumption chain jobs. People would have to buy that product. They'd have to learn how to use it. They'd have to store it. They'd have to upgrade it. Those are the consumption chain jobs that need to be focused on. So that's how all the pieces come together. Hopefully that's a reasonable explanation.
Sure, sure. Now, one of the things about jobs to be done is that in using ODI is that there seems to be you've had good success, right? I mean, really good success compared to other methods, let's say.
Sure.
And but you've also worked and been successful with some very large and outstanding companies. Has that swayed your success rate because they had the time and resources to get this done?
Well, it's a great question. They they made the time and resources to get it done. The time it takes is about 2 to 3 months, so it's not as if it takes forever, you know. But a lot of startups don't have 2 or 3 months, and they don't have the money to invest in an approach. They don't have the time or money to focus on it. And a lot of times, the entrepreneur is very confident in their idea, and they just want to get it built. And venture firms are really designed to help them do exactly that. Just spend the money and get the prototype built and test it out and see if it's going to work in the marketplace. You know, a lot of our clients, Joe, are in the medical space. They can't afford to get it wrong, right? The product life cycle, our development cycle is 3, 4, 5 years. It's got to go through FDA approval. If they get it wrong, they've just wasted a tremendous amount of time and money. So they recognize that. So they're definitely willing to spend a little bit more time up front to get it right. But we see that in lots of industries. Most of our clients are Fortune 500 companies, like you said. They've tried all these other approaches. They don't want to fail either. And so they're willing to spend a little bit of time up front to get it right before they jump in with the development work. And I think part of the challenge here, and I'm working on this, is to figure out how do we take the approach and make it more palatable for startups. And I've worked with a few startups in the last few years to help think through, what is the ODI light, if you will. What is better than nothing? How do we get them started in such a way that they could at least be in the right ballpark? And to that end, I think the answer is at least understand the job the customer's trying to get done, have a job map, have a set of outcomes. Maybe you don't know which ones are more important, and if there's segments of customers with different unmet needs, but at least you're in the ballpark. And if you keep focusing on satisfying all those outcomes that you've collected, you'll be successful. So I think that's the ODI light version of that. And we intend to put some tools out there that will help entrepreneurs do exactly that.
Can I use this method? Will I get value out of the book if I'm sitting there trying, as we talked about startups, trying to find product market fit? Because I find so many startups, they spend 90% of their money on product and 10% on market, right? And that's a two-way street. We really need to be like 50-50 or 60-40 or something. But can I start using this approach in the early development stage once my idea crystallizes and kind of prototype it with the jobs to be done approach?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, well, a lot of the work that we do with jobs to be done is just to help clients position products they already have. We have a great case study that's on our website with Arm & Hammer, their animal nutrition group, for example. They have products out there they've been selling for years. They just wanted to see if they were aligned with customer needs and if they could position them better in the marketplace. So we used the outcome-driven innovation approach to figure out what is the job that dairy producers are trying to get done. And we uncovered what their needs are, which were unmet. And then we better positioned the products that Arm & Hammer currently has around those unmet needs. So that changed the messaging, the sales pitch, and that sort of thing. And without changing the product or the pricing, but just with a new market strategy, if you will, they went from, they increased their 2013 to 2014 revenue by over 30%, which is just a great gain, especially considering they didn't change their products or anything. So thinking of it as a marketing tool is certainly valid. I'd say in nearly all the engagements that we participate in, we say that we're going to help the client better position the products they already have, improve the products they already have, and discover opportunities to create brand new products. Because once you know what the job is and what the unmet needs are, the one analysis reveals answers to all those key questions.
I think this sounds like, the typical way you should create a value proposition, get away from all the Post-it notes too. I mean, because it's a key. If you bring that out and understand that, I think if your customer understands it well, if you define it well, your employees and the rest of your group gets it, okay, for lack of a better way of saying it.
Sure. Well, you're exactly right, and that's it's often used for exactly that. Once we know where the unmet needs are in the marketplace, we help companies create the right value proposition. And I'll just a quick example with a company called Coloplast. They are in the wound care market, and we studied the wound care market with nurses and discovered that many of the unmet needs didn't relate to the way they were positioning their product. In fact, the way all competitors were positioning their product was all around making the wound heal faster. That seemed to be the dominant thinking. But what we discovered is that most of the unmet needs related to making sure the wound did not get worse. So they went out with the value proposition that said, we prevent complications. And they tied the evidence that their products prevent complications to that value proposition. And they too, without changing their product or their pricing, generated double-digit revenue growth within a 6-month period. So, you're mentioning the right thing. Just aligning what you do with the customer needs can really go a long way in describing the value proposition to the customer.
Most of the people that surround me are kind of mid-sized company, not necessarily startups, and you always kind of think of them as scaling or that next S-curve to face, and the job to be done approach makes such good sense for them. But if I buy into this, what's the real secret to getting upper management to commit the resources? Because it's not it's a process. It's going to take 2, 3, 4 months to do probably correctly.
Yeah, that's right. And there's got to be a return on investment. So the return on investment comes in a number of different ways. The first is the fact that you're increasing your chances of success. So if you can increase the chance of success by 5x, that's going to save you money. Also, it is when we use ODI, ODI has been refined for 25 years, so it's a good, solid innovation process. So using the approach, you've already saved 25 years of pain and suffering of trying to figure this out on your own. So rather than having to reinvent the wheel to create an innovation process that's going to get you success, you just apply it, and that's part of the ROI as well. And of course, there's then things like time to market. You may say that spending 2 or 3 months up front is costing you time, but you're eliminating a good part of your pivoting and failing fast, right? So you know that the product that you're building is the product that's going to win in the marketplace. In the end, it actually helps save you development time as opposed to adding development time. So those are the 3 key core financial metrics, if you will, that we often talk about when we're selling the concept to executives.
Outside procrastination, okay, what's the biggest roadblock you have found in someone getting started?
There's a number of roadblocks. Certainly budget is one, team commitment is another, and just a resistance for process when it comes to innovation, I'd say, is probably the third. A lot of people just think that innovation is not a process, can't be a process, that you can't quantify opportunities, that customers don't know their needs, and that it's just kind of a guessing game. And they just don't believe that it can be systematized. And I think we're making progress in that direction by showing success year after year. I think people begin to realize that maybe this can be systematized and put into a process. But I think that's really the biggest resistance, is just resistance to process itself, and an inability to conceive that this can actually work, that you can mitigate the risk, that customers really do know their needs, and they can communicate that and you can quantify it.
Well, and I think what's so key is that good companies that are striving to understand their customers better, this really seems to me should be an ongoing process, because it's not to stick a bad word in here, okay, but this could prevent you from being disrupted, right?
Well, companies should adopt this, and a lot of our clients have, and we've trained them, teams within companies to do ODI, and it's been very exceptional. Some of our best clients who we've worked with 6, 7, 8 years have adopted the theory. They have internal practitioners. We train and help those practitioners. But at the same time, when they come into a really difficult challenge, they reach back out to us and ask us for our help on a complicated project. And so I think it's a really great way to build a long-term relationship with a client, is to teach them how to do what we're doing, but be there to help when the going gets a little tough.
Is there something particular that you'd like to add, Tony, that I didn't ask?
I can just say that I've been really excited to be doing this for the last 25 years. Over the first 25 years of doing this, we've been trying to perfect the concept. And over the next 25 years, I think what we want to do is really help make this a standard innovation practice. So, some of the things that we'll be doing in the coming months will be more like making it more accessible. In the book, the new book, we lay out all the steps associated with outcome-driven innovation. So we're pulling back the curtain a bit. We have patents on our process. We've been protective of what's in it and how it works. But I think making it more readily available to people and revealing exactly how it's done is going to help us gain better adoption. And so that's more of our direction over the coming years.
Well, I think the work you've done and the work you've outlined really is to me seems the way that you can make a customer centric. That buzzword there is that you can bring him in and really understand his work, because unless you do that, the customer's still out there in kind of on the right of the process flow. But till you get to the point of really understanding the work they do, okay, and how they're using your product, you really can't make them customer centric, can you?
Well, I think you'd have a pretty difficult time. Sure.
What is upcoming for you, and where does someone learn more?
Well, Joe, I think there's lots of places now where people can learn more about outcome-driven innovation and jobs to be done. We've just updated our website, our Strategy website, and includes a pretty good section on jobs to be done and outcome-driven innovation, so that's a great place to start. The two books that we have out there, even the first one, it goes into a lot of great detail about how to apply jobs thinking through our approach. The latest version picks up on that and goes and takes it to the next level. The new book also came out after some of these other books come out, so we had the opportunity to take a look at what's in them and I think give some pretty good advice on how to avoid mistakes in applying jobs to be done thinking, and making sure that when you put it into practice, that you're applying it in a way that we know will work. So I think there's some really good helpful hints in there as to what actions to take and what to avoid and what to look out for. So I think all those are really good starting points.
Well, I'll have to tell people that when to me, and it's a very honest appraisal about the Jobs to Be Done book, the first time I read it, I went, okay, I've been reading his stuff. I've been reading Tony's stuff for a long time, and the book is okay. All right? But as I dug into it and it took that kind of that deeper dive, okay, for lack of a better word, the second and third time through, it was great. My opinion of it has risen every time I went through it again, okay? Maybe I'm getting smarter, okay? I don't know.
That's funny. Well, our clients say the same thing. The first time they hear the concept, they go, oh, that's interesting. And then, as they start thinking about it and how it can apply in their situation and all the nuances and details behind it and how they're considered in the process, they become more appreciative of the approach. So I appreciate you saying that.
It's a book that you're going to keep around, that you're going to dog ear and mark up, and your offer as a Kindle Unlimited book is fantastic for people to pick that up. I can't imagine anyone, okay, in business that doesn't pick it up if they're a Kindle member, okay? I would like to thank you very much, Tony. This podcast will be available on Business 901 iTunes Store and the Business 901 blog site. So thank all the listeners for listening.